My wife wrote the rules. I need to say that now because if I say it later, you'll think I'm building to it, and I'm not building to anything. I'm telling you what happened to my marriage on a Thursday in March on Route 20 outside Imlay, Nevada. And the first thing you need to know is that the rules everyone keeps asking about, the rules that got posted on Reddit, the rules that got screenshotted and shared and turned into a thing. My wife Corinne wrote them, not the night clerk before me. There was no night clerk before me. There was my wife sitting in room 6 of the Dustline Motor Lodge with a yellow legal pad and a felt-tip pen, writing rules for a situation she understood, and I didn't, because she had been coming to this motel for 7 months before I found out, and the rules were not for the motel. The rules were for me. I should tell you who we are. Were. I don't know which tense applies anymore. My name is Graham Kessler. I'm 38. I have a master's degree in structural engineering from the University of Nevada, Reno, and I worked for a consulting firm that contracts with NDOT, the Nevada Department of Transportation, doing bridge and overpass assessments along the I-80 corridor. It's good work, stable, the kind of career that lets you buy a house in Spanish Springs and put 2 kids in a decent school district and feel like you're not failing at the American project even if you're not exactly winning it either. Corinne was a family therapist with a private practice in Sparks. We met in grad school. We've been married 14 years. Our kids are Lily, who's 11, and Marcus, who's 8. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand that we are not edge cases. We are not people who live on the margins where strange things have more room to happen. We are suburban. We are insured. We are the people who drive past motels on Route 20 and never stop. Because why would we? We have a house. Corinne started going to the Dustline in August of last year. I didn't know. She told me she was driving to Lovelock every Thursday for a peer consultation group. Other therapists meeting after hours to discuss difficult cases, the kind of professional development thing she'd done before and that I had no reason to question. She'd leave after dinner around 7. She'd be back by midnight, sometimes later. I didn't track her. I didn't check. We were married. We trusted each other. That's what trust is. It's the thing that makes you not check. I found out in February because of the mileage. Her Subaru needed an oil change and I took it in on a Saturday, and the service tech mentioned the mileage was high for the interval, about 1,200 miles more than it should have been based on her normal driving patterns. I didn't think a fare, not immediately. Corinne isn't. She's not that kind of person. And I know how that sounds. I know everyone says that. But I'm an engineer, and I think in patterns, and Corinne's patterns didn't match infidelity. She wasn't secretive with her phone. She wasn't distant. She wasn't performing happiness. She was exactly the same as always, which in retrospect was the thing I should have found most disturbing. I checked the Subaru's navigation history. She'd deleted destinations, but not the recent searches, and the search history showed Route 20, Imlay, Nevada, 17 times between August and February. Imlay is a census-designated place 40 miles east of Lovelock on I-80. Population around 300. There is functionally nothing there except a gas station, a famous folk art installation called Thunder Mountain, and a handful of buildings that exist because the railroad needed a siding at that spot in 1868. There is no peer consultation group in Imlay. There is no reason for my wife to go to Imlay 17 times. I didn't confront her. Another pattern deviation. A confrontation is what the jealousy model predicts, what the betrayal model demands. But what I felt wasn't jealousy. It was the specific and architectural unease of discovering that a load-bearing wall in your house is not where the blueprints say it is. Not anger, not hurt. Something more structural. The sense that the building you live in has a room you didn't know about. I decided to follow her. Thursday, March 5th. I told Corinne I had a site visit in Winnemucca. and would be home late. She told me she had her peer group in Lovelock and would be home late. We kissed in the kitchen, a real kiss, not a performance, and I felt the warmth of her mouth and I thought, one of us is lying and the other one isn't, and we're both acting like this is normal, and maybe that's the most married thing we've ever done. I left first, drove east on I-80, took the exit for Imlay, pulled into the gravel lot of a place called the Thunder Mountain Trading Post, and waited. It was 6:40 p.m. The sun was going down behind the Humboldt Range, and the light was doing that Nevada thing where it turns the sagebrush gold, and the sky goes from blue to peach to a color that doesn't have a name, a color that only exists for 11 minutes in the high desert in early spring, and then it's dark, really dark. Route 20 dark, no streetlights dark. Stars so dense they look like static dark. She passed me at 7:25, the white Subaru heading south on Route 20 toward the Lovelock Junction, except she didn't take the junction. She kept going south, past the turnoff, deeper into the basin. I followed at a distance, headlights off, navigating by her taillights and the last residue of twilight. Route 20 is straight here. Dead straight. The kind of road that exists because someone drew a line on a map and then paved it. No topographical concessions, no curves. Just a line through the basin floor with the Humboldt Sink somewhere off to the west, and the Trinity Range somewhere off to the east, and nothing in between except sagebrush and alkali flats and distance. She drove for 12 minutes. Then her brake lights flared and she turned right off Route 20 onto a gravel access road I hadn't seen. I stopped on the shoulder and watched. Her taillights bobbed along the access road for maybe a quarter mile and then stopped. I could see a structure. Low, horizontal, dark except for a single light. An exterior fixture, sodium vapor orange. The kind of light that makes everything look like a crime scene photo. I waited 5 minutes. Then I followed. The Dustline Motor Lodge is the kind of place that makes you recalibrate your understanding of the word operating. It's a single-story, 12-unit motor court built in the 1960s based on the architecture, L-shaped, with a small office at the front of the L and the rooms running along both arms. The exterior is painted cinder block, once white, now a color that weather and alkali dust have negotiated into a grayish tan. The sign is a backlit plastic panel on a steel pole, the kind of sign that's designed to be read from a highway at 60 miles an hour. Except this place isn't on a highway. It's a quarter mile off Route 20 on an access road that doesn't appear on Google Maps. The sign says Dustline Motor Lodge. Vacancy. HBO in letters that suggest HBO was once a selling point. Corinne's Subaru was parked in front of room 6. I could see light behind the curtains. The office was dark, no other cars in the lot, no one at the desk. The only sound was wind. Basin wind, steady and dry, carrying alkali grit that ticked against my windshield like fingernails. I parked at the far end of the lot, near room 12, and sat in my truck and watched room 6 and tried to decide what I was. A husband following his wife. A man about to discover an affair. A structural engineer who had found the hidden room and was now standing outside it, trying to decide whether to go in. Whether going in was a right I had. Whether going in would break something that couldn't be rebuilt. Whether the not knowing was load-bearing. Whether our marriage needed the not knowing in order to stand. At 8:15, the door to room 6 opened and Corinne came out. She was alone. She was wearing what she'd been wearing at home. Jeans, the green flannel she likes, her hair pulled back. She didn't look like someone leaving an assignation. She looked like someone stepping out of a room to get air. She leaned against the doorframe and looked up at the sky, and I could see her face in the sodium light, and her expression was one I'd never seen before. Not happy, not sad, focused, concentrated. The expression of someone doing math in their head, working through a problem that requires the full width of their attention. She went back inside. The door closed. I sat in my truck for another 40 minutes. No one else arrived. No one else left. At 9 p.m., I got out and walked to room 6 and knocked. The look on her face when she opened the door. I'll never be able to describe it accurately. Not surprise, not guilt. Something closer to recognition. Like she'd been expecting this knock, not tonight specifically, but eventually. Like this was a variable she'd accounted for. "Graham," she said. Not a question, not an exclamation, just my name placed into the air between us like a card on a table. "What are you doing here, Corinne?" She looked at me for a long time. Then she stepped aside and let me in. Room 6 was not what I expected. I expected a motel room. Bed, TV, bathroom, the anonymous geometry of transients. And it was that, technically. But Corinne had been coming here for 7 months, and the room showed it. There was a folding table set up near the window with her laptop, a stack of yellow legal pads, and a scatter of pens. The wall above the table was covered. And I mean covered, floor to ceiling, corner to corner, with photographs. Printed photographs taped to the cinder block in overlapping rows. They were all of the same thing, the desert, the basin, the flat alkali expanse visible from the motel's back windows. But they were taken at different times, different light conditions, and when I looked closely, they were documenting something. Changes. In one photo, a patch of ground about 50 yards from the motel showed a faint discoloration, a darkening, like moisture seeping up from below. In the next, taken from the same angle but clearly a different day, the discoloration was larger. In the next, larger still. And in the most recent photos, the ones closest to the window, the discoloration wasn't a patch anymore. It was a pattern, a geometric pattern. Lines and angles, precise and deliberate, visible on the desert floor like a watermark becoming legible. "Sit down," Corinne said. She pulled out the desk chair for me and sat on the bed across from me and put her hands on her knees and took a breath like she was about to deliver a diagnosis. "It's not an affair," she said. "I can see that. I need to tell you what it is, and I need you to listen to all of it before you react. Can you do that?" "I'm an engineer, Corinne. I listen to structural reports all day. I can listen." She didn't smile. "This is harder than a structural report," she told me. It started with a client. In July of last year, a woman came to Corinne's practice. A referral from a primary care doctor in Fernley. The woman was in her 50s, a long-haul trucker's wife, lived alone most of the month in a double-wide near the Humboldt sink. She presented with insomnia, anxiety, what looked like standard isolation-related depression. Corinne started seeing her weekly. In the third session, the woman told Corinne that she'd been seeing someone on her property. Not a trespasser, not a neighbor. Someone who was already there when she looked, standing in the flat expanse behind her house at varying distances but always facing her. Always during the day, never at night. The figure was human-shaped, but she couldn't make out features. It looked, she said, like a person standing in a heat shimmer, all outline and no detail. When she walked toward it, it didn't move. It didn't retreat. It simply wasn't there anymore when she got close enough. Like a mirage, except mirages don't stand in the same spot for 40 minutes. Corinne did what a therapist does. She explored the perception. She screened for psychosis, for substance use, for neurological symptoms. Everything came back clean. The woman was cogent, grounded, self-aware. She knew it sounded crazy. She had a Ring camera on her back porch and she showed Corinne the footage, and the footage showed nothing. Just the empty basin, sagebrush, alkali flats, no figure. But the woman's behavior on the footage was consistent with watching something. Her head tracked, her eyes focused. She was seeing something the camera wasn't recording. In the fifth session, the woman said the figure had started moving, not toward her, laterally, walking in slow arcs around her property, always at the same distance, like it was orbiting her. And she said she'd noticed marks on the ground where it walked, not footprints, lines. Thin, precise lines scored into the alkali crust, geometric, connected, forming patterns she couldn't identify. Corinne drove out to see for herself. This was against her professional instincts. A therapist going to a client's home, entering the delusions territory. But the woman was deteriorating. She wasn't sleeping. She'd stopped leaving the house. And Corinne is the kind of therapist who believes that the clinical boundary exists to protect the client, not the therapist's comfort. And sometimes protecting the client means crossing the line. She drove out to the double wide near the Humboldt sink on a Thursday afternoon. The woman showed her the backyard, the flat basin stretching to the horizon, no figure, but Corinne saw the lines. Thin, pale scores in the alkali crust, like something had been dragged through the surface layer. A stick, a tool, a finger. They formed angles, right angles, acute angles, curves that connected into shapes she didn't recognize. They covered an area about 40 feet across, centered roughly behind the double wide. These could be anything, Corinne told the woman. Animal tracks, erosion patterns, ATVs. They weren't here in June, the woman said. I've lived here 11 years. They started in July. When the person started, Corinne took photographs. She went home. She didn't tell me about it. I was in Winnemucca that week, assessing a bridge over the Humboldt River. And when I came home, she asked about my trip and I asked about her week. And she said uneventful, and neither of us was lying exactly because uneventful is relative, and she hadn't yet decided this was an event. 2 weeks later, the woman stopped coming to sessions. Didn't cancel, didn't call. Just didn't show. Corinne called her. Voicemail. Called again the next week. Voicemail. Drove out to the double wide on a Thursday. The double wide was empty, not abandoned. The woman's truck was there. The lights were on. There was food in the refrigerator. But the woman was gone. And the lines in the backyard had expanded. The geometric pattern now covered an area Corinne estimated at 200 feet across, extending from the back of the property deep into the basin. And the lines were deeper, not surface scratches anymore. Grooves. Channels cut into the alkali, 3 or 4 inches deep, precise, with edges so clean they looked machined. And at the center of the pattern, where the lines converged, the ground was dark, wet-looking, as if something below the surface was pressing up. I reported her missing, Corinne said to me in room 6. Pershing County Sheriff, they did a welfare check. They found what I found. Empty house, truck in the driveway, no signs of disturbance. They classified it as a voluntary departure. Long-haul trucker's wife, isolated, maybe she went to family. Case open but not active. You know how it works out here. I know how it works out here. I should have let it go. That's what a therapist is supposed to do. You lose a client, you document it. You consult with a peer, you move on. It happens. People ghost their therapists all the time. It doesn't mean something ate them. But you didn't let it go. No. She looked at the wall of photographs. I went back. I kept going back. Every Thursday. I told you it was the peer group, and I went to the basin and I watched the pattern grow and I took pictures and I tried to understand it. Understand what? The geometry, Graham. The geometry is talking. She pulled a legal pad from the stack on the table and opened it to a page covered in her handwriting. Small, precise. The handwriting of someone who takes clinical notes for a living. Diagrams. Angles measured with a protractor. Calculations. The lines form a language, not a symbolic language. A spatial one. The angles encode information. The relationships between the lines. The ratios, the proportions. They're not random. They're structured. They're saying something. And the thing they're saying is getting more complex every week. Saying something to whom? To anyone who looks at them. That's the delivery mechanism. The pattern is a communication system that operates through visual processing. You look at it, and the geometry enters your perceptual system, and it starts doing something in there. I don't know what, but I can feel it. Feel what? She closed the legal pad. She looked at me, and for the first time since I'd knocked on the door, she looked scared. I can feel it thinking, in my head, not thoughts. Structures, geometric structures assembling themselves in my visual cortex. When I close my eyes, I see the pattern. Not like a memory, like a blueprint being drawn in real time. It's building something in me, Graham. And I don't know what it is, but it's not finished. I want to pause here and tell you what I was feeling, because I think it matters. I was not feeling fear. I was not feeling the dread you're probably expecting from this kind of story. I was feeling the specific, ice-cold clarity of a man who is realizing that his wife is mentally ill. I'm not proud of that. But I'm an engineer. I think in material terms. My wife was telling me that a geometric pattern in the desert was communicating with her through her visual cortex, and the most parsimonious explanation, the Occam's razor explanation, the explanation that doesn't require me to throw out everything I know about how the world works, was that Corinne was experiencing a delusional system, possibly triggered by the stress of losing a client, possibly building for longer than that, and she had been driving to a motel in the middle of the Nevada basin every Thursday to feed it. I almost said this. I almost said, Corinne, I think you need to talk to someone. Not a peer group, a psychiatrist. Someone who can evaluate what's happening. I almost said it. But she knew. She could see it on my face, the same way she could see it on every client's face when they told her something they thought she wouldn't believe. She was a therapist. She knew exactly what I was doing. The compassionate tilt of the head, the careful voice, the internal diagnostic already running. She'd done it herself 1,000 times. Come outside, she said. Corinne, you're about to suggest I'm having an episode. I know, I would too. So come outside and look and then you can decide. She opened the back door of room 6. There was a back door, leading onto a small concrete patio that faced the basin. And she stepped out into the dark and I followed her because she was my wife. And following her was what I'd come here to do. The desert at night in central Nevada is an absence. There's no ambient light, no sound floor, no reference points, just the ground under your feet, and the sky overhead and a darkness between them so total that your brain stops trying to process it and starts inventing. You see shapes. You see movement. Your visual cortex, starved of input, starts generating its own. And that's a well-documented neurological phenomenon, and I was telling myself that, holding that knowledge in front of me like a flashlight. Corinne had an actual flashlight. She turned it on and pointed it at the ground. The pattern was there, starting about 20 feet from the back of the motel and extending into the basin as far as the flashlight beam reached. Lines scored into the alkali crust, precise, geometric, forming shapes that connected into larger shapes that connected into a system that was. I couldn't deny this, even then, even in the grip of my rational, compassionate, diagnostic certainty. Organized, deliberately organized. The angles weren't random, the proportions repeated. There was a grammar to it, a syntax, and my engineer's brain, my brain that reads structural drawings and load calculations and recognizes pattern and order as professional practice, that brain said, this was made by something that knows what it's doing. How far does it go? I asked. Last Thursday, it extended about a quarter mile from the motel. The week before, 200 yards. The week before that, 150. It's growing at an increasing rate. Growing from what? She pointed the flashlight toward the center of the pattern, deeper into the basin. I couldn't see the center. It was too far. But I could see the lines converging, the geometry tightening, the angles becoming more acute as they drew together toward a focal point somewhere in the dark. From whatever's at the center. I haven't gone to the center. I've been observing from here, from the motel, documenting the expansion. But the center is where it started, and the center is where the ground is wet, and the center is where... She stopped. The center is where my client was standing when I came to look for her the second time. You said the house was empty. The house was empty, but I walked into the basin. I followed the lines. And at the center, about a quarter-mile out, I saw her. She was standing in the pattern, in the middle of the convergence point, facing away from me. I called her name. She didn't turn around. I walked closer, and I could see that she was. She was tracing, with her hands, moving her fingers through the air like she was drawing, and where her fingers moved, the lines appeared on the ground below her. She was making the pattern. That's not... I know it's not possible. I know. But I watched her do it for 20 minutes, and then I left because I was scared. And the next week when I came back, she wasn't there anymore, but the lines she'd drawn were still there, and there were new ones extending outward, and she was gone, Graham. She was just gone. And the pattern kept growing. I want to tell you what happened next in the way it actually happened, not in the way that makes a clean story. What happened next was an argument, a real one. The kind married people have when the stakes are too high for politeness and too complicated for anger. The kind that sounds like two people speaking different languages and knowing it and being furious about it. I told Corinne she needed a psychiatric evaluation. She told me that a psychiatric evaluation wouldn't explain the lines in the ground. I told her the lines in the ground could be anything. Geological, hydrological, animal activity, human activity. She told me I hadn't looked at them closely enough. I told her I was a structural engineer and I could tell the difference between a pattern and a coincidence. She told me that was exactly why she needed me to actually look, because I was the one person she knew who could confirm whether the geometry was structured or random, and she hadn't told me because she knew that I'd do exactly what I was doing right now, which was to diagnose her instead of looking at the evidence. That landed. It landed because she was right. I was diagnosing her. I was standing in a motel room with a wall full of photographic evidence and I hadn't looked at it. Not really. I'd glanced at it and categorized it as part of the delusion and moved on, because looking at it seriously would mean considering the possibility that my wife wasn't sick. And if my wife wasn't sick, then something was making patterns in the desert and putting geometric structures in her head and making people disappear. And I did not have a professional framework for that. I looked at the photographs. I looked at them the way I look at structural drawings. Not for content, but for order, for the mathematics, for the relationships between elements. I pulled 3 photos from the wall and laid them on the table side by side, chronological, and I measured the angles with the protractor Corinne had been using, and I calculated the proportional relationships, and I checked them against each other, and they were consistent. Across 7 months of growth, across hundreds of new lines and shapes, the proportional relationships held. The same ratios repeated at every scale. The same angles recurred. The geometry was fractal, self-similar, and it was converging on something. The mathematical relationships pointed inward, toward the center, like a sentence pointing toward its verb. "What is it saying?" I asked. "I don't know all of it. I know some of it." "Tell me the part you know." "It's an invitation, the geometry. When you look at it, when you really process it, it activates something, a desire, a very specific desire, to go to the center, to walk into the pattern and follow the lines inward. That's what happened to my client. She looked at the pattern and the pattern told her to go to the center and she went. And what's at the center? I don't know. I haven't gone. That's why I made the rules. She pulled the yellow legal pad from the bottom of the stack, the one she'd been writing on most recently. She tore off the top 3 pages and handed them to me. I read them. They were not rules for a motel. They were not rules for a night clerk. They were rules for me. For Graham Kessler, structural engineer, rationalist, husband. Written by someone who knew how I think, how I process, how I resist. Written by a woman who had spent 14 years married to my patterns and could predict which ones would kill me. I'll tell you what they said. Not the version that got posted online. That version was garbled, third-hand, stripped of context. The real version. The one in Corinne's handwriting. Graham, if you're reading this, you followed me here, which means you're already in the motel, which means you've already started. I'm sorry. I should have told you earlier. I was afraid you'd have me committed. I'm still afraid of that. But you're here now. So these are the things I need you to know. 1. Do not go outside the motel after dark. The pattern is active at night. During the day, it's inert. Visible but inert. At night, it processes. Looking at it in daylight is like reading a book. Looking at it at night is like the book reading you. 2. If you feel a compulsion to walk into the basin toward the center, toward where the lines converge, that is the pattern working. It will feel like curiosity. It will feel like your own idea. It is not. Sit down, close your eyes, and count backward from 100. The compulsion passes in about 90 seconds. I've timed it. 3. Do not try to map the pattern. I know you. I know your first instinct will be to document it, measure it, bring your equipment out here, and survey it. Do not do this. Focused analytical attention accelerates the geometric implantation. The more precisely you study it, the faster it builds in your visual field. I studied it for 5 months before I understood this. I can no longer close my eyes without seeing it. Do not make my mistake. 4. The motel is a boundary. Something about the structure. The foundation, the walls, possibly the materials, interrupts the pattern's propagation. The lines stop at the edge of the parking lot. They do not cross the gravel. I don't know why. I think it might be the concrete. The pattern can score alkali andite and soil, but it cannot score poured concrete. The motel's foundation is a continuous slab. Stay on the slab. 5. There is a woman who comes to the motel. She looks like my client. She looks like Donna Mackey. She is not Donna Mackey. She will knock on the door between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. and she will ask for a room. She does not need a room. She needs you to open the door. Do not open the door. Speak to her through the door if you must, but do not open it and do not look at her face. Her face is part of the pattern now. Looking at her face is the same as looking at the lines. 6. I love you. That is not a rule, but it's the reason I'm still sitting in this motel room every Thursday instead of driving to the center, which is what the pattern wants. The pattern is patient. It does not need me to go tonight. It knows I'll go eventually if I keep looking. So I keep coming here and I sit on the boundary. And I study it from a distance I know is safe, and I try to understand it before it finishes building whatever it's building in me. I may be wrong about the distance. I may be wrong about the safety, but I am not wrong about the love. And if that's the only true thing on this page, it's enough. 7. If I'm not here when you arrive, if you come to the motel and my car is here, but I'm not in the room, do not go looking for me. Do not go into the basin. Call Lily. Tell her mom had to go somewhere and she'll be back. Then leave. Drive back to Spanish Springs. Do not come back here. 8. Do not trust the version of me that comes back if I go to the center. The pattern returns people. Donna came back once. I saw her in the parking lot 3 weeks after she disappeared. She looked the same. She smiled at me. But when she walked in geometric lines, right angles, precise turns, not the way a person moves. The pattern had finished building in her. She was the pattern wearing a body. She walked back into the basin, and I haven't seen her since. If I go to the center, the same thing will happen to me. The thing that comes back will look like me and love you like me, and it will not be me. I read the rules in room 6 while Corinne sat on the bed and watched my face the way you watch a jury. I want to tell you I believed her immediately. I want to tell you I read the rules, and my rational framework crumbled, and I took my wife's hands and said, I'm here, I believe you, we'll face this together. That's the version of this story that makes me the hero. Here's what actually happened. I read the rules and I felt the ground shift under me and I said, Corinne, we need to go home. I can't go home yet. Why not? Because it's Thursday and between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. the woman comes and I need to be here when she comes because if no one's here she tries the other rooms. And if no one's in the other rooms, she goes into the basin. And every time she comes back from the basin, the pattern grows faster. How does your being here stop that? She knocks. I answer through the door. I tell her there are no rooms. She leaves. She walks back into the basin, but slowly, and the pattern doesn't accelerate. I think she needs to be refused by a person. I think the pattern sends her to the motel to test the boundary, and when a person holds the boundary, the pattern's growth slows. Corinne, listen to what you're saying. I know what I'm saying. You're describing a ritual, a compulsive ritual. You come here every Thursday, you answer the door, you refuse the woman, and the pattern slows. That's OCD. That's a textbook compulsive ritual with a magical thinking framework. Go outside and look at the ground, Graham. Look at the geometry. Tell me that's OCD. And I had looked, and I couldn't tell her that, because the geometry was real and it was structured and it was growing and my wife was not psychotic, she was right. And being right was worse than being psychotic because psychosis has medication. It was 10:45 p.m. Corinne settled into what was clearly a practiced routine. She closed the laptop, turned off the overhead light, and sat in the desk chair facing the back window. Not the front door, the back window, facing the basin. I watch the pattern, she said, until she comes. I watch it to make sure it hasn't crossed the parking lot. I sat on the bed. The room was dark except for the sodium light filtering through the front curtain and the faint directionless starlight through the back window. I could see the desert through the glass. I could see the ground. And in the starlight, if I let my focus soften, I could see the lines. They glowed, not with light, with contrast. The scored lines in the alkali were slightly darker than the surrounding surface, and in the starlight the contrast was just enough to make them visible. And they were moving, not the lines themselves, the pattern, new lines appearing at the edges, extending outward, the geometry expanding in real time like frost forming on a window, slow enough that you had to watch for minutes to see it, but fast enough that once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it, and the overall effect was beautiful. I need to say that. It was beautiful. The geometry was precise and intricate and self-similar, and it spread across the basin floor like a living mandala. And I understood, in a sudden, visceral, non-rational way, why Corinne couldn't stop coming back. Not because of duty, not because of the woman who knocked, because the pattern was gorgeous, and watching it grow was like watching a symphony being written in real time, and somewhere in the center of it, where all the lines converged, there was something that the geometry was describing, some shape or structure or meaning that was almost comprehensible. Almost. I closed my eyes. I counted backward from 100. At 73, the compulsion passed. You felt it, Corinne said. Not a question. I felt it. Now you understand Rule 3. At 11:20 p.m., someone knocked on the front door. 3 knocks, measured, even. The kind of knocks that come from a hand that has practiced knocking until the gesture is mechanically perfect. Corinne didn't get up. She said loudly enough to be heard through the door, "No vacancy." A pause. Then a woman's voice, clear and ordinary. "I just need a room for the night." "No vacancy. Try Lovelock." "I've been driving a long time. I'm very tired." "I'm sorry, there's nothing available." Silence. Then footsteps on gravel, moving away. I got up and went to the front window. Corinne said, "Graham, don't." But I was already looking through the gap between the curtain and the frame. A woman was walking across the parking lot away from room 6 toward the desert. She was moving in a straight line, perfectly straight, with a mechanical precision that no human gait produces. No sway, no adjustment, no micro-corrections, like a figure in a video game walking on a rail. And as she reached the edge of the parking lot, where the gravel met the alkali, she turned. Not a curve, a right angle, 90 degrees exactly, without breaking stride, and began walking along the boundary line between the gravel and the desert, tracing the perimeter of the motel lot in perfect geometric segments. "She's testing it," Corinne said from behind me. "She does this. She walks the perimeter and then she goes back." "What is she?" "She's Donna Mackey. Or she was. The pattern finished whatever it was building in her, and now she's part of it. An element. The way a line is part of a drawing. She looks human. She is human, that's the worst part. She's not dead. She's not a copy. She's Donna Mackey with something else in her head. The completed geometry, the full structure. And the structure uses her body to interact with the physical world in ways that the lines in the ground can't. She knocks on doors. She asks for rooms. She tests boundaries. She's the pattern's hands. The woman completed one full circuit of the parking lot perimeter. Right-angle turns at each corner. Then she walked back into the basin, along one of the scored lines, following it inward toward the center. I watched her until the darkness swallowed her. It took a long time. She moved at a constant speed, and she did not vary her path, and she did not look back. Corinne and I stayed in room 6 until 4 a.m. We talked, not about the pattern, about us, about the kids, about the practice, about whether the marriage could absorb this, whether any marriage could absorb one partner having a secret geometric invasion in her visual cortex. We talked the way you talk when you're both exhausted and scared, and the pretense has been stripped away, and what's left is just 2 people in a motel room in the desert trying to figure out if they're still on the same team. I asked her how bad the implantation was, how much of the geometry she could see when she closed her eyes. "It covers about 60% of my visual field," she said. "It used to be 20. It's been increasing by about 5% per month. At this rate, I'll be at full coverage by September." "And then?" "Then I don't know. Maybe I become like Donna. Maybe the compulsion becomes irresistible and I walk to the center. Or maybe I just go blind to everything that isn't the pattern. Maybe it replaces my visual reality entirely and I stop being able to see the actual world." "We should tell someone." "Who? What doctor treats geometric perceptual implantation by an anomalous desert pattern? What medication do you prescribe? I am the professional who would handle a case like this, Graham. And I am the case. And I am telling you that my professional toolkit has nothing for this." She was crying. I hadn't seen Corinne cry since Marcus was born, and there were complications, and we spent 4 hours not knowing if he'd be okay. She cries the same way she does everything else. Precisely, efficiently, with an awareness of what the tears are for and an impatience with their duration. "There has to be something," I said. "There is something. The motel, the boundary, the concrete. Whatever property of this structure interrupts the pattern's propagation. It also slows the implantation. When I'm here, inside the motel, the geometry in my head stops growing. It's like the concrete blocks the signal. That's why I keep coming. Every Thursday I sit in this room for 6 hours, and the pattern in my head pauses. And it's the only pause I get. And it's the only reason I'm still at 60% instead of 100. So we move you in. You stay here permanently. The pattern stops. And I leave my practice. I leave the kids. I live in a motel on Route 20 and I never go outside. That's your solution? It's a start. It's a cage. Corinne, it's a cage or it's a center. Those are the options. She looked at me, wiped her face, sat up straight. There might be a third option, she said, but I need your help, and you're not going to like it. She explained it on the drive home, both of us in my truck. Her Subaru left at the motel because she was too tired to drive and because I think she wanted the excuse to go back for it. She explained while the headlights cut through the basin darkness and the alkali stretched flat and featureless on either side, and Route 20 ran straight and empty like a line in a pattern. The geometry was structured. It had syntax. It was saying something. Corinne had been studying it for 7 months, carefully from a distance, accepting the cost of incremental implantation in exchange for incremental understanding. And what she'd decoded, partially, was this. The pattern was a blueprint, not metaphorically, literally. The lines scored into the desert floor were a structural diagram for something three-dimensional. A building, a space, an architecture. The geometry on the ground was a flattened projection of a volumetric structure, the same way a blueprint is a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional building. And the thing it was describing, the building it was blueprinting, was not a building that could exist in normal space. The angles were wrong, not wrong like a mistake, wrong like non-Euclidean. The geometry operated in a dimensional framework that had more than 3 spatial axes, and the blueprint was a set of instructions for constructing a space that existed in those additional dimensions, and the space it described was. Corinne struggled with this, and I could hear her struggling, hear her therapist's precision failing against something that resisted clinical language. The space it described was a room, a single room, vast, multidimensional, impossibly shaped, but functionally, a room. And the room wanted to be built. It's recruiting builders, she said. That's what the implantation does. It teaches you the geometry. It installs the blueprint. And when the blueprint is complete, when it covers 100% of your visual field, you know how to build it. You can see how the lines on the ground translate into the structure in the higher dimensions. And you go to the center and you start building. Building with what? With the ground, with the alkali, with your body. Donna walked to the center and started tracing lines with her hands, and the lines appeared in the ground. She was building. She was constructing the room, one line at a time, and the pattern was growing because she was drawing it. You're telling me a vanished truck driver's wife is standing in the Nevada desert, building a non-Euclidean room with her fingers. I'm telling you something is using her to build, and it wants to use me, and the room is almost finished. How do you know it's almost finished? Because the geometry in my head, the 60%, it's the part that's already been built. The part I can see when I close my eyes is the completed portion of the structure. The remaining 40% is the part that still needs to be constructed. When my implantation reaches 100%, it won't be because the pattern has filled my vision. It'll be because the room is done. And what happens when the room is done? She didn't answer for a long time. We were on I-80 by then, passing Lovelock, the lights of the gas stations and the prison visible across the flat dark. "I think the room opens," she said. "I think it becomes habitable. And I think whatever lives in it, whatever designed the blueprint, whatever sent the geometry, comes in. I'm going to tell you the third option now, the one Corinne said I wouldn't like. She wanted me to look at the pattern, really look at it, not with the intention of mapping it. She'd warned against that, and she was right. But with the specific, targeted attention of a structural engineer assessing a blueprint for flaws, she wanted me to find the error. Every structure has a weakness, every design has a point of failure, and if the pattern was a blueprint, then somewhere in its geometry there was a joint that didn't hold, a load path that didn't resolve, a structural element that could be disrupted to compromise the whole. She wanted me to do the thing I do professionally, read a set of plans and find the part that's going to fail. Except the plans were an alien geometric language scored into the Nevada desert, and reading them would start the implantation process in my head, and I would be racing against the clock of my own perceptual colonization to find the flaw before the geometry consumed my visual field. "No," I said. "Graham, you're asking me to infect myself. I'm asking you to use your expertise. You are the only person I know who can read structural geometry at the level this requires. I've been staring at it for 7 months, and I can see that it's organized, but I can't evaluate it the way you can. I'm a therapist. I read people. You read buildings, and this is a building. It's not a building, it's you said it yourself, it's non-Euclidean, it's higher dimensional, it's a structure. Structures have engineering. Engineering has failure modes. Find the failure mode." We argued about it for 2 weeks. At home, in the kitchen, in the bedroom after the kids were asleep, in low voices because Lily was getting old enough to hear tension through walls and ask about it. We argued, and I said no, and she said please. And I said it's too dangerous, and she said I'm at 63% now, and the number is going up, and if we don't do something, I will walk into the desert in September and not come back, and our children will grow up without a mother. She played the kids card because she had to, because it was true. On March 19th, a Thursday, I drove to the Dustline Motor Lodge, alone. During the day when the pattern was inert, I brought a transit level, a measuring tape, a field notebook, and a digital camera. I told Corinne I was doing a preliminary assessment only. 1 hour, no more. I would observe the geometry, document what I could, and evaluate whether a structural analysis was even possible given the non-standard dimensional framework. I parked on the concrete slab. I walked to the edge of the gravel. I looked at the pattern. I'm not going to describe what I saw in detail because describing it is a form of transmission, and I've already said more than I'm comfortable with. But I'll tell you this, Corinne was right. It was a blueprint, and my engineer's eye, the eye that spent 15 years reading plans and assessing structures, that eye could read it. Not fluently, not completely, but enough to see the logic, the load paths, the way the lines on the ground represented force vectors in a dimensional framework I couldn't fully perceive, but could infer. The way you can infer the shape of a building from its shadow. I spent 45 minutes at the edge of the gravel, looking at the pattern and drawing in my field notebook. When I closed my eyes, I could already see it. Faint, like an afterimage, but present. The implantation had started. Corinne was right about that, too. I drove home. I worked on the drawings that night after the kids were in bed, translating what I'd seen into conventional engineering notation, adapting it, approximating the non-Euclidean elements with the closest standard equivalents. And at 2 a.m. in my home office in Spanish Springs, I found it. The flaw. It was at the convergence point, the center, the place where all the lines met. In conventional structural terms, it was a node, a junction where multiple load paths intersect and transfer forces. In any structure, the nodes are the critical points. They're where the forces concentrate. They're where failures start. And this node was overloaded. The geometry had too many lines converging at the center. Too many force paths feeding into a single junction. In a normal building, this would mean the node was under-designed. The structural element at that location couldn't handle the combined loads and would eventually buckle or shear. In this building, this room, this impossible space, the equivalent failure would be a collapse of the dimensional framework at the convergence point. The room, if completed, would be unstable. It would fold. The geometry would contradict itself at the center, and the contradiction would propagate outward through the pattern, and the whole structure would... I didn't know what it would do. In normal engineering, a structural collapse means the building falls down. In non-Euclidean higher-dimensional geometry, I had no idea what collapse meant. But it meant the room wouldn't hold. The thing that wanted to inhabit it would arrive in a space that was already failing. And maybe that was enough. Or maybe the flaw was intentional. Maybe the geometry had been designed to overload the center node because the overload created something. A stress, a pressure, a dimensional distortion. That was the whole point. Maybe the flaw wasn't a flaw. Maybe it was the door. I called Corinne. It was 3 a.m. and she answered on the first ring because she hadn't been sleeping either, because the geometry doesn't let you sleep when it's building. I found something, I said, but I don't know if it's a weakness or a feature. Tell me. I told her. She was quiet for a long time. There's a way to find out, she said, but you're really not going to like it. She wanted to go to the center, not to build, not to trace. She wanted to go to the convergence point and observe the node, the junction, in person, up close, to see whether the overload was a flaw in the design or a deliberate structural element. And she wanted me to go with her, because I was the one who could read the engineering and because... She said this directly, without sentiment, in her clinical voice. She didn't trust herself to come back alone. She was at 67%. The compulsion to stay, to begin building, would be strong. She needed someone who was at a lower percentage to physically pull her out if she couldn't leave on her own. What percentage am I? I asked. You spent 45 minutes with direct analytical focus on the pattern, probably around 8 to 10%. And going to the center? Would accelerate it significantly, maybe 20, 25%, but you'd still be well below the threshold. What's the threshold? I don't know exactly. Donna was at full coverage when she walked in. I think the compulsion becomes irresistible somewhere above 90. Below that, you can still choose. You're at 67 and you think you can still choose. I think I can choose if you're with me. That sentence. I think I can choose if you're with me. 14 years of marriage collapsed into a single structural principle. We are each other's load-bearing walls. Remove one and the other doesn't stand. Thursday, March 26th. We drove to the Dustline together. We told the kids we were going on a date night. We asked Corinne's mother to babysit. Lily said, "You guys never go on dates." And she was right. And the normalcy of the complaint made me want to cry. We arrived at 6 p.m., still daylight. We had 2 hours before dark, before the pattern became active, before the geometry started processing, before the lines in the ground became something more than lines. We were going in during the inert period because Corinne believed the risk was lower. The implantation would still occur, but the compulsive pull, the desire to go deeper, that was a nocturnal phenomenon. During the day, you could look at the pattern and feel its beauty without feeling its hunger. She believed that. I chose to believe her. We walked into the basin together, side by side, following the scored lines inward toward the convergence point. The geometry surrounded us, spreading in every direction. An enormous, intricate, precise diagram covering the desert floor like a map of something that shouldn't exist. And I read it as we walked. I couldn't help it. My engineer's eye tracked the load paths, identified the structural elements, decoded the force vectors. The implantation crept upward. I could feel it. A subtle filling of my visual field, like fog forming at the edges, except the fog had angles. Corinne held my hand. Her grip was tight and her hand was warm, and I focused on that. On the physical, human, and non-geometric reality of my wife's hand in mine. It took 20 minutes to reach the center. The convergence point was a circle, roughly 15 feet in diameter, where every line in the pattern terminated. The scored grooves in the alkali were deepest here. Not inches, but a foot or more, cut into the earth with an impossible precision. And at the very center of the circle, the ground was open. Not a hole, not a crack, an opening. A place where the surface of the desert had been folded back or folded in. And what was underneath was not earth. It was geometry. Three-dimensional geometry, visible, tangible, hanging in a space that extended downward, or inward, or in a direction that had no name. Below the desert surface, I could see the structure, the room, partially built, immense, beautiful, its walls and surfaces formed from angles that my brain couldn't fully process, but my professional instincts recognized as architecture. And it was wrong. I saw the flaw. Standing at the convergence point, looking down into the opening, I could see the node where the overloaded force paths met, and I could see the stress. The dimensional equivalent of a crack, a hairline fracture propagating outward from the junction, a failure that would worsen as the structure grew, that would eventually... "It's going to collapse," I said. "The room, when it's finished, the node can't hold. The geometry contradicts itself at the center, and the contradiction is going to tear the whole thing apart." Corinne was standing next to me, looking down. Her face had the expression I'd seen that first night. Focused, concentrated. But now I could see something else in it. Longing. She was looking at the room and she wanted it. Not the way you want a thing. The way you want a home. "Corinne, it's so close to finished," she said. "Graham, it's so beautiful. The proportions. The way the spaces relate to each other. It's the most perfect room I've ever... Corinne, we need to go. What if the flaw is fixable? What if you could redesign the node? You're an engineer. You could. You could recalculate the load paths, redistribute the forces." "I am not going to help build this room." She looked at me. Her eyes were full of the geometry. I could see it, literally see it reflected in her pupils, or projected from behind them, angular shapes rotating in her irises like a kaleidoscope. "It just wants somewhere to live," she said. "Whatever sent the blueprint. It's not malicious, it's not a predator. It's just something that needs a room and can't build one itself. And it found people who can build, and it's asking." "It's not asking. It took Donna. It's taking you." "Donna volunteered. I'm volunteering." "No. Graham, I'm at 67%. In 3 months I'll be at 100 regardless of what we do. The motel slows it, but it doesn't stop it. The pattern is in me, and it's going to finish. And when it finishes, I'm going to walk into this desert, whether you're here or not. So the question isn't whether I build the room. The question is whether the room is safe." I stood at the center of a geometric pattern in the Nevada desert, and I looked at my wife, and I understood, with the cold architectural clarity that is both my gift and my limitation, that she was right. The building was going up. The question was whether it would stand. I'm going to tell you what I did. I'm not going to tell you if it was the right thing because I don't know, and I won't know. Possibly ever. I went home. I sat in my office. I opened my field notebook and I looked at the drawings and I redesigned the node. I redistributed the force paths. I recalculated the load bearings. I found a configuration that resolved the contradiction, that allowed the converging geometries to coexist at the center without mutual destruction. I solved the structural problem in the room that something was building in the desert outside Imlay, Nevada. I made it stable. Then I drove back to the Dustline, alone. On a Sunday, in daylight. I walked into the basin with my field notebook and I knelt at the convergence point and I looked at the opening and I reached down. This is the part that doesn't translate into words. I adjusted the geometry, with my hands, the way Donna had. The lines responded to focused intention the same way they responded to physical tracing, and my intention was structural, precise, engineered. I moved 3 force paths. I widened 2 angles. I added a load-bearing element that the original design lacked. A brace, essentially, a geometric strut that transferred the excess force away from the node and distributed it through the surrounding structure. The fix took 11 minutes. When I pulled my hands back, the fracture at the center was gone. The node held. The room, down in whatever space it occupied, settled into itself with an almost audible sigh. A release of tension, a structural resolution. The sound a building makes when the last support is placed and the weight finds its path to the ground. I drove home. My implantation was at roughly 30%. I could see the geometry when I closed my eyes. Angular, precise, slowly rotating. But it wasn't growing. It had stopped. The blueprint in my head was complete, not because it had filled my visual field, but because the structure was finished. There was nothing left to build. The geometry went quiet the way a song goes quiet when the last note resolves. Corinne is still at 67%. It stopped growing in her too. The blueprint finished itself. Or I finished it. And the implantation ceased. She can see the geometry when she closes her eyes, and she says it's stable now, static. A completed structure rather than an expanding one. She describes it as beautiful. I describe it as architecture. We're both right. The pattern on the desert floor outside the Dustline Motor Lodge is still there. But it's not growing. The lines are scored into the alkali, and they will probably be there for years, decades, slowly eroded by wind and weather. The opening at the center is closed. Whatever the room was, wherever it was, it's finished and it's occupied, and the door. The convergence point is shut behind whatever went through it. Donna Mackey has not been seen. Corinne reported her missing again, properly this time, with a full account that omitted the geometry and focused on the facts. Client stopped attending sessions. Welfare check found an empty home. No further contact. Pershing County keeps the file open. Donna's husband comes home from long hauls to an empty double-wide and doesn't know why, and Corinne carries that on a shelf in her chest next to the 67%. We're still married. I don't know how to explain why except to say that the thing that should have broken us, the secret, the deception, the 7 months of Thursday night lies, that thing turned out to be the same thing that held us. Corinne kept the secret because she was protecting me. I followed her because I was protecting her. We went to the center together, and we each did the thing the other couldn't do alone. She gave me the problem, and I gave her the solution. And neither of those transactions was possible without 14 years of knowing exactly how the other person's mind works. The rules Corinne wrote are still in room 6 of the Dustline Motor Lodge. I don't know who posted them online. Possibly a subsequent guest, possibly a cleaning crew, possibly someone who broke in after the motel was abandoned. The owner, an 80-year-old man in Lovelock who had no idea what was happening on his property, finally shut it down in April. The rules circulate without context. People read them as fiction. People read them as creepypasta. People say this is fake, or this is the scariest thing I've ever read. And they're both missing the point because the rules were never for the public. They were for me. They were a wife's letter to a husband she was afraid she'd never get to explain things to in person. I'm writing this because of the 30%. The geometry in my visual field is static, complete. It doesn't grow, but it doesn't shrink either. And when I close my eyes, I can see the room. The finished room, the stable room, the room I fixed, I can see inside it. I can see that it's occupied, and the thing that occupies it is aware that I can see it, and it is grateful, and its gratitude has a weight and a presence that I feel in my chest when I'm lying in bed next to Corinne at 2 a.m., and the house is quiet and the kids are sleeping and the desert is 60 miles east and the geometry turns slowly behind my eyelids like a mobile above a crib. It's grateful, it has a room, it's home, and sometimes, not often, maybe once a month at the edge of sleep, I see new lines, new geometries, not in the desert, in the room, extensions, additions, annexes. The thing in the room is renovating. It's expanding its space, building new rooms off the original, extending the architecture deeper into whatever dimension it occupies. And the blueprints appear in my visual field the way the original pattern appeared in the desert. Slowly, incrementally, waiting to be read, waiting to be assessed, waiting for an engineer to check the load paths and make sure the structure is sound. I haven't told Corinne. She'd write new rules. She'd make me stop. And maybe she'd be right. Maybe the gratitude is another kind of hunger. Maybe the new blueprints are another recruitment. Maybe I fixed the room and now I'm the maintenance man and the maintenance never ends and eventually the renovations require more than I can do from behind my eyelids and the thing in the room will need me to come inside. But here's the thing I can't tell Corinne, the thing that keeps me up at night, the thing that makes this a horror story and not a love story. I want to go inside, not because the geometry compels me, not because the implantation has reached a threshold, not because I'm being manipulated or recruited or consumed. I want to go inside because I built it, because I fixed the flaw, because it's the most complex, most elegant, most perfect piece of structural engineering I have ever seen or will ever see. And it has my work in it, my solution, my brace at the center, and I want to walk through the rooms I helped make stable and see the spaces I helped make possible. I want to go inside because I'm an engineer, and no engineer can resist the building they built. And I think the thing in the room knows that, and I think it's patient. And I think the new blueprints keep appearing because it knows I can't stop reading them. The Dustline Motor Lodge is closed. The motel is dark. Route 20 runs straight through the basin the way it always has. If you drive it at night, you won't see the pattern. The geometry is inert, the lines are fading, the convergence point is sealed. There's nothing to fear. But if you're an engineer, if you're someone who reads structures the way other people read books, don't stop, don't get out. Don't look at the ground too carefully, because the lines are still there if you know how to read them, and what they say is beautiful, and what they describe is a room, and the room is occupied, and the thing inside is looking for a second opinion on the new addition. Drive past, go home. Hold the hand of someone who knows how your mind works. And if you close your eyes and you see angles, if you see geometries assembling at the edges of your vision, don't count backward from 100. Don't fight it. Just open your eyes and look at something real. Look at your wife. Look at your kids. Look at the way the light comes through the kitchen window in the morning and lands on the table where your family eats breakfast. That's the only architecture that matters. I keep telling myself that. And most mornings I believe it. But the blueprints are getting more complex. And the thing in the room is very, very patient. And I am very, very good at my job.